Never underestimate the power of
Alan!
This week's episode is about playing against mages. Called it comment of the week. This week was inspired by the comment of Guy, who challenged me by saying that he doesn't expect a video on it. So I was like, nah, I'll make a video on it. I wanted to make one video because I very rarely talk about it, on playing against mages and assassins and what you should do against them. So thank you, Guy, for the recommendation. I of course read every single comment that you guys post. Before we talk about how to play against mages, I think it's important to talk about what kind of mages exist. Well, all mages are shit for Teemo. They all counter mages, but there's 3 different kinds of mages. I ranked them here by their range. First of all, you've got kind of short range, around 500 range burst assassins. So even though LeBlanc can gap close, for example, her spells in general are within your auto attack range. Control mages can often function slightly outside of your auto attack range. So for example, Viktor with his E can be around 700-800 range. Nivea, for example, has around the same range. The longest range mage that exists in the game are artillery mages like Xerath and Ziggs, and they usually operate at such a long range that you can't even get to them because you have no gap closers, you only have your movement speed. Of course, I'm not just gonna do these 3 comments, but in general, if you're playing against a mage assassin, then both tankiness against control mages, you have to abuse their long cooldowns, and against artillery mages, you have to play around the fact that they're very immobile and play around the fog of war. Of course, I'll give far more input down the line. Let's talk about why mages are so bad against Teemo on the first hand and why they counter him. Why are mages strong? Well, first of all, they have a lot of burst, which means that some mages can deal their entire combo before you can even return the damage. You've played against a fed LeBlanc sometimes, so right, they can just do their whole combo, you're dead, and you never got a chance. On the opposite side of the spectrum, they counter them because they have so much range. So the artillery mage is at such a high range that you can't even touch him. Sometimes you don't even see the Xerath while he is killing you. But the largest aspect that all of them have together and why they all counter Teemo is that they're not auto attack based. Mages usually don't use their auto attacks, they use spells. So your blind is just completely useless. And when you think about it, if you have a Teemo against a mage, you're really just a small, squishy, and fast auto attacker that has no gap closer. Your W doesn't do too much, your E is just an auto attack enhancer, your Q is useless against mages, and your Shrooms will have a use, but in the first 5 levels you don't even have access to them. Obviously, for most mages, Teemo is a very easy matchup, and when people ask me what should I play against Teemo, I usually say just play a mage. One of the easiest mages to play, for example, is Heimerdinger, in my opinion. Where just constantly push into Teemo and outvalue him over time. Yeah, someone asks about rapid fire against mages. The problem with rapid fire, and why I'm not gonna talk about it in the stream, is that the item is just kind of bad and it scales really bad. So you can kind of force to make it work, but even in the games where I did it and it worked well, it was still kind of weak. That forces you to go into funky items like Protobelt and Lichbane and whatnot, and then it's very weird and suboptimal most of the time. Now there are 2 matchups where I recommend it, which are Battlemages that I'm not really talking about in this slide deck in this presentation. So Battlemages like Swain, like Ryze, like Cassio. There you can go rapid fire, and you've probably seen me do it before. But the problem that I personally have with it is that the build path is very awkward. I've had games where I was 7-0 against the Ryze with Rapid Fire, Fleet, Stormrazor. And the Ryze was just as useful as me, or more useful. Because the build is just so awkward. And sure, you can get a long range poke off, but if they start to be really good, they can also fuck with you. So it is okay against battle mages in particular. So Ryze, Cassio. It's them specifically because if you have a 700 range auto attack, they can't respond to you. For example, it's worse against Viktor because Viktor can just E you if you try to go for a long range auto attack. So if mages pretty clearly counter Teemo, right? Then what can Teemo do against them? What makes mages weak? Here I will specifically talk about Mages top lane, even though the question was about mid lane, because I've got far more experience against top lane mages. Mid lane mages, to be honest, I think most matchups just come down to dodge their abilities and push as many waves in as you can without dying face off. You just try to neutralize the lane and live life. In the top lane, there's a lot more interaction because the lane is so long and you are so more susceptible. Mages are weak, especially in the top lane. First of all, because they are squishy. So they are squishy, and if you can get onto them, they kinda just die. Especially in prolonged fights. Besides a battle mage, in a long fight, Lux will probably lose to you, while a Cassio would probably still win in a long fight against you. They are also very low mobility, so if they throw their skill shots out and they make a mistake, they're really slow and you can often just catch up to them and kill them. Even though you're also squishy with low mobility, you at least have your movement speed and you can have openings to go on them. The third point is that even though they burst base, which is bad for Teemo, they win the short trades really hard, but if you do all-ins, they sometimes struggle. I've had plenty of times where LeBlanc would get me to 20% HP. After she gets me to that, all of her spells on 5-second cooldowns and I just kill her. Finally, especially in the lane, mages are very mana dependent. And they do have pretty high mana costs, and they do want to use their spells a lot in the lane. So if you can make them run and keep them in the lane, especially if they don't run teleport. So I've seen, for example, Victors go... I've seen people go Viktor top with Ghost. They don't have TP, you can keep them in the lane and they are very weak comparatively during that moment. If you can somehow get on to the mage while they wasted their cooldowns, you can in general kill them. So even though it is a bad matchup with close to every single mage, those are generally the characteristics that we will be looking to exploit in the next few parts. Where are you strong to kind of fight them? Well, first of all, you've got the level 1 cheese that I will go into more depth later on, where at level 1 with your passive you're very strong, while most mages need all their 3 spells. So you can try to go for 100 to 0, especially if they have TP. If they have TP, a level 1 all-in can be a bit scary because they could just TP back and then the wave is pushing towards them and in the end you actually lose way more XP than they did. But if they, again, Viktor with Ghost top lane, I would always go for level 1 cheese. One very important concept about both mid lane and top lane Teemo is that if you allow the mage to push, then that mage has the opportunity to use his spells to poke you. If you push the lane, they need to decide between pushing the wave with their spells and attacking you with their spells. Very often, for example, once again, against a Viktor, I will push the wave. That will stand away from my minions, so that he has to decide, does he E me or does he E the wave? If he tries to E the wave and direct it towards me, I have a much bigger chance of dodging that spell. As I mentioned, your Shrooms actually do have value because mages are so squishy and have limited movement abilities. You can really limit the movement options. Once you have your Shrooms, you can throw them in while the enemy sees you. So for example, here's a Viktor. I will throw Shrooms over here and over here. And because they're very squishy, they will avoid these regions a lot. But if they avoid it, then you can limit the scope where they can walk. Later on, you can abuse that. And for example, if you throw a Shroom over here, then you can often go into the bush. And usually, right, the mage would like to stand on the opposite side of you. But because you throw a bush here, they're scared of the sweeper. Also because mages usually have low attack speed, even if they go sweeper, it will be difficult for them to clear that many Shrooms. So this is why Shrooms can be very valuable in limiting the options. And of course, right, you can always do a stealth cheese. And then the wave pushes in, you have your Shroom and you kill them. Eventually, what you can also do is you can push in waves, and then just go invisible. And the mage has the issue that your all-in is actually pretty strong. So they won't want to go along with the wave because they're scared of you all-inning them. So imagine you're playing against Lux. Lux will probably throw her spells around to check where you are. She has long cooldowns and it's gonna cost her mana. Of course, you're not gonna play against Lux top lane that much, but that's the general principle. The same applies to Viktor, for example. I actually play against a surprising amount of Viktors or Syndras and whatnot. Of course, the lower the cooldown of their spells, the harder it is to do a play like this, because Syndra can spam her abilities across the lane quite a lot. So that's how you want to use your Shrooms. You want to minimize their possible movement range, and then after you push in the wave, you want to terrorize them, make them scared to come into you. That way you can build an advantage. This is all cool, of course, but usually after mages get their mythic, so they get their Ludens, they get their Liandries, you start to fall off because they can just one-shot waves and set up ganks onto you really easily. So even if you're doing well against a mage, after a while it will still be difficult because the reasons why mages inherently counter you, right, they don't change. However, in the same way, if you manage to get a really good all-in, mages really hate having low economy, so constantly being behind in items. So if you can win the lane and do really well in the lane, then you can keep snowballing onto them, keep denying them, keep delaying the item spikes, and that way you win. If you're against a mage, you need to focus on your early game really hard, because the mid to late game, usually you do get outvalued simply because of the nature of your kits. This time I decided to include some runes and items as well for you guys, some practical advice. So again, I in general recommend these 4 runes. All of them have their specific use cases. If you see me use another rune, as I will in the examples, I can explain why. But in general, against burst mages, so I keep having LeBlanc here, right? Very few people play LeBlanc top lane. But also if you're, and burst mages are just like assassins. So if you play against a Talon top lane, against a Zed top lane, against an Annie top lane, against a Kiana top lane, Grasp is pretty good simply because of the HP it gives you and sustain in lane. You want to be very healthy so that it can't all in you, which is a concept that I mentioned the first week, right? The same way you can go fleet footwork, but fleet footwork makes it a bit squishy and can be hard to get off sometimes. Against control mages, I actually recommend PTA because PTA is the best. Control mages struggle with playing around invisibility, playing around all-ins the most. Oftentimes control mages will want to poke you down over time, so you need to all-in them, which is why PTA is really strong. Against artillery mages, usually they have so high range that all you can really do is just max Q, go airy, and poke them whenever you can. So you try to dodge Xerath Q, then Xerath W, and then you get a Q back. But in general, artillery mages mid lane, there's not that much you can do. One special tech is Electrocute. It can work just like PTA. Nice thing about Electrocute is if they're all squishy and you're the only AP damage dealer, it allows you to do some plays like flash, auto Q ignite on a squishy target. And it also allows you to go Ludens and Protobelt, for example, which PTA incentivizes a bit less. So if you want to go full burst, you know, kill the mage before they can react, then Electrocute can be really, really good. So especially against control mages. Against burst mages, it's a bit scary, because usually the burst mage is going to outburst the burst Teemo. Then what minor runes do you want? Well, as I said, you really want to play for lane. Second Wind and Nullifying Orbs are really good. Second Wind for in-lane sustain and Nullifying Orb for the all-in. So you will see me run this a lot against Kennen and Akali, who honestly are also basically mages. Kennen is a burst mage and Akali is... she's probably a battle mage, but you can call her between a control mage with her shroud and burst mage with her ult. Of course, they use energy, but they have the same cooldown limitation, so it kinda functions the same way. So I really recommend Nullifying Orb. Then, just like I talked about last week, sometimes you just need defensives, especially Nullifying Orb. Maybe you've had that happen against you, where the enemy buys it and your damage output is way lower. Especially if they rush Sorcerews, Nullifying Orb is extremely strong, and you very often want to buy it against the mage. Mages are the few matchups where I would actually consider buying Merc Threads, but that is kinda enemy team dependent. When you see these mana runes, you might ask, do you need to go full tank? The question there is no. Teemo isn't a tank, and the items just function or exist so that you don't die, but you don't pick Teemo to be a pure tank. You might as well pick, you know, Mundo or something else top. You should still build damage. For example, here I saw that we had a Kayn and an AD carry, so they're not gonna stack MR. I saw that they're all super low range. I saw that they're all really squishy, so I decided to go Electrocute. After I started winning the lane, I went full AP because now My win condition wasn't surviving the lane, it was actually killing everybody, and I ended up carrying this game. This is what build adaptation means. For example, in this game, we have a lot more AP. We have a Zac, a Rumble, and a Yuumi, and they are a lot tankier with a Hecarim, a Kali, Yasuo, Nautilus. So this game, in the same matchup against Viktor, I decided to go Airy with Scorch because I'm playing for the lane, Second Wind, and I build it quite tanky. We're actually gonna look at this game later on. One really nice thing about Unflinching and Second Wind is that some abilities, like for example Viktor W, you can actually just run through them if you have enough tenacity. So this is why Merc Turrets can be very powerful against a lot of champions. It also helps against Azir, for example, who I've played against, or Annie with her stuns. Merc Turrets are kind of poggers. So now let's talk about all three matchups. I already talked kind of how to play against all any champions, and a lot of the concepts that I talk about there are also gonna be applicable here. If you're playing against a burst mage, an assassin, or an all-in, you want to deny their mobility spells by throwing your ult on where you are. If you know that the LeBlanc is gonna jump onto you with her W, then you might as well throw a Shroom on yourself so that you can deal damage back. That's what I mean with deny mobility spells. Or you can throw a Shroom on a ZW so that he doesn't go on there. Then, obviously, I talked about all-in assassins. You want to build tankiness early and have tankiness in your runes. Burst mages tend to have pretty long cooldowns because they want to do one rotation. You need to judge whether after the combo goes through, you can just go for an all-in. And especially against AD assassins, so Zed or something, just buy Zhonya. Banshees is situational, but Zhonya is a turbo broken item against them, and you can often just build it as a first item. Against control mages, it's very important that you dodge abilities, especially to deny mana flow stacks. If you deny sufficient mana flow stacks, they struggle with mana a lot more come the mid game, and you can't play for the get them win condition. Then, especially against control mages, I recommend doing a level 1 all-in and pushing the lane. I will show that in an example. Also against all mages, calling for a gank, that's the main weakness really of a lot of mages. They're really low mobility and squishy, so just you can just call for a gank. As I mentioned, against artillery mages, they're usually so high range that you can't really do too much against them. You just max Q, try to push in, and then roam. You can do the Shroom trick that I mentioned there to make them paranoid, use the passive, but if you can't use your passive and any tricks, then just roam, honestly. I'll show a better example later on, but here, first of all, I want to mention that I'm a man of my word. I'm playing against Viktor here. And I've got Airy, I've got Scorch, I've got Second Wind. I'm playing for the lane, super hard. And usually you would see me go into the tri-bush at level 1. But here, I'm walking towards this bush where I see that no one is there. And then I see that he isn't there, and I go for the level 1 all-in, where I go invisible here, I wait for the wave to arrive, and I go onto him. I've done this before, but I couldn't find any video examples of it, sadly, in any of the VOD that I did. As you can imagine, I don't play against mages that often. I usually play against bruisers a lot more. I don't think I will do a video specifically on bruisers, because I feel like there's too many different kinds of bruisers, but I might do like one matchup per day where I give specific advice. I don't know. Maybe you guys can give me some advice for future topics. The first example that I want to show is the previous game against Viktor. Example game number 1, right? This is not the actual chat, this is the late chat. Here I play against Viktor and I go for the level 1. I actually go Q here because I really want to Q him. I want to get my mana flow stack as well, but it doesn't work out. Yeah, one thing, right? Someone in the chat actually asked, like, how do you dodge victory? It's by doing these small baiting maneuvers. So I was actually moving forward there. He does his E, and then even before I see the E, I already walk upwards. This is the power of clicking a bunch of high APM, where if you're constantly redirecting your movement, they will try to predict it, and as you can see here, it's gonna fail. And this might not seem that much, but right, that's one less E that he has mana for. So constantly predicting that is really nice. Here I went into the bush and he tried to check, but obviously he can't cover the whole bush. Another thing in general against all ranged champions, Right? You can also do this against Teemo, by the way. It's you should be playing towards your bush, even against a battle mage like Cassio. Cassio, for example, would function by putting her poison on you and then spamming her E, her twin fangs, over and over onto you. But she can't do that if she doesn't see you. If she does a ward here, then she can't ward for the jungler. A lot of the times, against mages, against a bunch of ranged champions, if you can push and then use the bushes to deny vision, it's very powerful. For example, usually, if I was positioned over here, right, Viktor would just start pushing and poke me with his E. But because now I'm in his side of the jungle, I can abuse his long E cooldown. I can go here. And I started a fight here because I wanted to deny minion XP, but he actually moves forward to guarantee it. But as you can see, it's the 4th Q that I already was able to land. And I could have kept the wave neutral, but I actually wanted slightly pushing because, again, here, if you're imagining it from Viktor's perspective, you can either E me or E those 3 minions. And if you go for these 3 minions, like he does there, then he gets hit by a Q. So because I know that he wants to go for the minions, I can guarantee land my damage onto him. That's the power of pushing the lane. That's why I'm talking about it. Then here I make a worse trade because first of all, right, you should always focus on dodging abilities first. I kind of got overzealous from landing so many Qs that I wanted to land more and more Qs, maybe even dive him. But it was a mistake, especially because I'm fighting in this minion wave here. So I take a bunch of minion damage. I just kind of make it my priority to play as aggressively as I can because I'm thinking, oh, maybe I can dive this. Even though he's the mage, like, I'm constantly just barely within tower range and I'm constantly pressuring him. So I'm making it really difficult for him to land CS, for example. He missed that CS. And I'm forcing him to use spells for that CS as well. And if he wants to go for these minions, I use my Q. He wasn't the best Viktor, and again, like, Viktor is a bad matchup. Mages are a bad matchup, but you can make it kind of playable. Do I actually kill him there? Oh, okay, I die, I get a frozen wave. And here again, like, my jungler froze my wave from me, but I'm using my vision. And he has to throw his E here. Now his E is on a long cooldown. And even if I get hit, like, yeah, I get hit as well. But he isn't using his E for the minions, for example. I get a pretty chill crash, and now I've got 900 gold. I could easily base. And you know, I'm just giga chilling. Of course, I die against the Kali there. But you see how the lane is really, really chill. Of course, it gets worse with time. This is another concept that I wanted to talk about. So, right, I've got unflinching at Mercs, and I just easily walk through this magic field. And this is another concept that I talked about, right? Teemo's really good at all-ins. So he has to run away from me because I can threaten to just all-in him. And because of that, he had to go the long way, lose XP. I just keep harassing him, keep pushing him in. He has to use his ult, and then I actually manage to dive. He doesn't deal any significant damage to me because I've got second wind and Dorns. So now, even though I'm in a really bad matchup, I'm 30 CS up. I'm 2 plates up, even though I got jungle ganked. So very clearly, like, even though he might not be the best Viktor, you see how, you know, it can be winnable. There is stuff that you can do, and even though it's difficult, like, I'm trying to give you the keys to the kingdom here. Then the second example is against another control mage, which was Azir, which is from my YouTube. In a lot of lane phases, right, I said that you want to be the one auto-attacking or pushing the wave. But here I had to leash, so I wasn't able to push the wave. You can see though that I don't want him to just push me in relentlessly and keep me under the tower. I'm constantly auto-attacking minions just like he is. But because I've got Grasp, an early game rune, and because Azir isn't that strong in the early game, I can actually trade with him. Because in the end, his W is basically just an enhanced auto-attack, right? So, again, if I just took that small trade, he would probably be winning here. But because he used his soldiers, he used his Q, he doesn't have anything up anymore. But your damage isn't conditional like Azir's Q. Your E is always gonna deal the same damage, and you've got Ignite. So I'm actually able to kill him and blow his flash here. Wait, I don't kill him? But I kill him now with auto Q. Yeah. I'm able to fucking Astro Stomp on him. And I think here I stay. But I wanted to show that as an example of using your all-in. And I would play these fights where, right? I think a lot of you would just stand back here, get hit by the WEQ, and then, you know, keep auto-attacking the minions. But I just face-tanked his damage and force him to move away from his own soldiers because he's not gonna win the all-in. Later on, maybe, but not in the laning phase. Even though mages are annoying, like, right, that trade is bad, you do have windows to do something. Now he has a XP lead and a pushing wave, so I can't contest him too much. You see how if you just let them, by the way, right, all in threat, if you let them just push you in constantly and let them harass you under the tower, you're gonna have a bad time. You need to also be pushing yourself. I think, I mean, I don't know how you guys play in lower elo, but I kind of got Challenger without knowing what wave management was, because I would just push. And if someone ganked me, I would just try to 1v2 or go on my passive. Pushing is very powerful, and a lot of the times it allows you the agency. I went on to build Driftmaker and I had a very good game, even though he countered me. I do have multiple videos in the Cassio matchup for the chatter. The third example is a weird one. There are actually a surprising amount of people who pick Annie into me. I don't know if you guys experience the same thing in lower elos, but Annie, for a time, there was a time where I played like 20 Annie matchups in 100 games. Like every 5th game would be an Annie game. It has calmed down a little bit, but they would constantly play Annie against me. And the thing is, Annie is a really difficult matchup because she's just a burst mage, but instead of just LeBlanc, she has a very high auto attack range. And Tibbers, after she casts it, continues dealing damage. LeBlanc stops dealing damage after she casts her ult. But Tibbers is just gonna keep dealing damage to you, so it's very hard to do an all-in. Against Annie, I just tried to survive. I went conditioning, to be honest. Second wind might be good, and I went fleet footwork. I think this might have been even pre-nerf because I wanted to have as much HP as possible. Now, here I tried to prevent her from pushing in, but she did it anyway. And of course, I the first blood. I get a lucky first blood. I tried to push it in, but she is faster because I leashed. And again, this is a big problem usually. You do want to be the one leashing. I mean pushing. Because I also had the problem here where if you allow them to push, they get level 2 first. And mages especially have really rough level 2 spikes. Because a Renekton with this EW is not going to do anything to you. And Annie who has Q and W will always win the trade, you know? You want to be pushing so that they don't get level 2 first and push you out in the lane, as it happens here. I wanted to use that as an example. Of course, you kind of overforces and it works out. 2 key concepts. I'm building defensives early and I'm calling for jungle ganks. Because again, like Annie doesn't have any defensives. So if Diego wanted to gank her, he could have. Another important concept that I completely forgot to mention is that if you are the one pushing, you are the one who can go to the river fruit. So even though I'm heavily trading with Annie, I can go to the river fruit, I can take it, and you know, I can heal up. This is actually a super important concept. The river fruit spawns between minute 6 and 6:30. I feel like I've mentioned it a lot of times in other videos. This is another reason why pushing is so good, because even if you do a bad trade, you can do river fruit, it becomes a good trade. Yeah, sometimes you just gotta take it. Yeah, I continue to trade 1-for-1, fight a bunch. Annie is a very difficult matchup, but you could once again see a bunch of concepts that are used to win this lane. And the thing is, once you are aware of these concepts, before I played the Annie matchup like 20 times, right? Like I didn't know when I should be trading against Annie, what the trading patterns are. But I know how to play against burst mages. So because I have all of these concepts remembered, I was able to adapt my play and to win the lane. So I just hope that you pick up a bunch of concepts that I mentioned here, especially once I point them out in the video, that you can then apply to win yourself games. Especially since, right, you guys aren't one-twix, you don't have experience in every matchup. Like, 50 times. I just hope that whenever you have a fight or a matchup that you're not aware of, you can come back to the basics of stuff that I mentioned, of general plans in the mid game, of general stuff that you should be doing. And yeah, thank you very much for listening here. Thank you for the overall good reception in the comments, especially. I'll need to see how I can maybe ramble less, do shorter time formats, or maybe immediately show the examples. I wanted to first show the concepts and then show you how to apply them in the videos, but maybe I should immediately show them as I'm explaining them. It's your call. If you find this a bit too boring, I mean, if you watch until the end of the video, you're probably not gonna say that it was boring, but feel free to give me suggestions how I can make it more engaging for you guys. Maybe I should be doing quizzes in between slides to see like what your guys' reaction is. Should you push in the situation or not? But that was it with Teaching Teemo Tuesday.
Never underestimate the power of the Scouts code. 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 2, 3, 4. Scouts code. Code. 2, 3, 4. Yes, sir.